They didn't even give me a minute to gather my things. The guard just stood there with that blank stare, holding the door open like I was an inconvenience. I grabbed my coat off the back of the chair and tossed it over my arm. My palms still smelled faintly like soy paste and lemongrass, residue from the test batch I wasn't allowed to finish. They'd already disabled my badge. I didn't say goodbye to anyone. No dramatic scene, no tearful speech, just the scrape of my boots down the sterile hallway, the hum of exit lights above, and the rustle of my resignation packet folded into a brown envelope. 9 years, gone in 6 minutes. Outside, the city air was damp and gray. It had rained earlier, the kind that smells like rust and wet pavement. I stood at the curb and looked back one last time at the glass facade of the institute I'd founded, my reflection warped in its surface. They called it an executive realignment. I called it the culmination of a betrayal years in the making. But before the boardrooms and brand vision decks, there was a fire, a literal one. 9 years ago, I was standing barefoot in a smoke-filled rental kitchen with a migraine pounding behind my eyes. It was 2 in the morning, maybe later. My apartment stank of mold and expired beer from the couple upstairs. The linoleum floor was cracked from a previous tenant's attempt to deep-fry fish without supervision. I was hunched over a tiny hot plate that had just blown its fuse and ignited a small curtain fire. My neighbor, Jerry, banged on the wall with a, "Jesus Christ, again? Working!" I shouted back through the haze. The smoke alarm was screaming, but I didn't stop. Not until I got the pH balance right on a fermented pea protein that refused to behave. I'd been tweaking the microbial strain for 3 weeks, testing ferment times, temperature curves, strain ratios, trying to create something stable, scalable, and deeply savory. The heat of the fire had warped my test jars, but I managed to salvage a few ounces before I had to toss the rest. That night, in the middle of the chaos, I tasted it. Just a spoonful, still warm from the residual heat of the dead burner. And right there, on that burnt countertop surrounded by broken glass and sirens in the distance, I knew. I had something that could change everything. I spent the next year building it in secret, working weekends, skipping meals, taking out microloans. I called it core paste, and it became the base formula for a new kind of plant-based fermentation. One that didn't just replicate meat, but created an entirely new sensory category, something flexible, regional, infinitely adaptive. Eventually, it caught fire. The good kind. Investors, journalists, scientists, chefs, everyone wanted a taste. But I never forgot that night. The smoke, the failure, the moment I almost gave up and didn't. That fire didn't just burn a curtain. It sparked the beginning of everything. And now, standing on the sidewalk with my keys already deactivated, I knew this wasn't the end. This was just another ignition point. The first time I saw the article, I was elbow deep in a barrel of fermenting jackfruit and miso. Some blogger from Austin had snuck into one of our pop-ups and written a breathless piece calling my paste the most significant plant-based invention since tofu. Within a week, we were trending on Twitter. By the end of the month, I was fielding interview requests from culinary magazines I used to read at the library. It wasn't just buzz, it was a full-on wave. Underground chefs were remixing our formula into smoky burger patties, fine dining places were sculpting it into foie-style terrines. Even a food truck in Portland served it crumbled over sushi rice with a burnt scallion glaze. They called it neo-umami. I called it Tuesday. That's when the email came in, a short note from someone named Travis, VP of Strategic Growth for a hospitality group I'd never heard of. Subject line, Partnership Proposal, Let's Scale the Revolution. They flew me out the next week. The pitch was glossy, all clean decks and curated enthusiasm. They'd been watching my rise for months, called me a culinary disruptor. I hated the term, but I liked the numbers. They offered infrastructure, national logistics, marketing teams, chef partnerships, retail strategy, everything I didn't have time to build from scratch. The catch? I'd have to give up ownership, but I wasn't a fool. I brought in Micah, my lawyer since the days I paid him in food and favors. We stayed up for 2 nights straight combing through every clause. I could see him start to crack around 3 a.m., sipping burnt coffee out of a compostable cup. "You sure you want to sell for $1?" he asked. "I'm not selling the idea," I said. "Just the shell." He raised an eyebrow, flipping to the back of the contract again. "You really think they won't catch Clause 9B? They're too busy thinking I'm desperate." He smirked. Well, you're not wrong. Clause 9b was buried between indemnity and dispute resolution. It stated that if I were ever terminated without documented cause, I could reclaim full ownership of the original brand for the exact amount of sale, $1. It was airtight, unusual, probably overlooked. They didn't even blink when we signed, and just like that, I went from founder to creative director. A new badge, new office, same mission. At first, it felt right. The kitchens buzzed with energy. We hosted week-long flavor labs with chefs from 6 continents. We launched limited-run micro-menus in cities I'd never even visited. Our pace showed up in Michelin star dishes and neighborhood dumpling joints alike. I still had full creative control. My voice carried weight. My name meant something. Then came the introductions. The new COO wore Italian sneakers and used words like synergy and vertical expansion without irony. The VP of Culinary Aesthetics arrived in a lavender blazer and immediately suggested our test kitchen needed a splash of coastal optimism, but they didn't question the product, not yet. For now, I was still the heart of the brand. What they didn't know, what they'd missed entirely, was that I hadn't built this company for profit. I built it because the world was broken and bland and running out of food, and I had something better. I had vision, I had the recipe. And thanks to Clause 9b, I still had the last word. They just didn't know it yet. It started with a memo, not an announcement, not a conversation. Just a sanitized little PDF. Subject line: Team culture refresh, evolving our culinary ethos. I was CC'd, third from the bottom. The weekly innovation labs I'd built from the ground up, renamed. Now they were flavor vision huddles. They sounded like PowerPoint meetings, and worse, they were scheduled without any actual chefs, just marketing reps, junior analysts, and the new VP of Emotional Menu Strategy, who once described a dish as insecure. At first, I tried to laugh it off. Language shifts, teams evolve. That's what I told myself. But then came the remodel. My test kitchen, the room where the paste was born, where we used to scribble taste notes on the walls and run midnight tastings over cheap wine, was gutted. The steel counters were replaced with curved pastel islands. The exhaust hoods got painted blush pink. There was a ring light bolted into the ceiling. Someone called it a wellness-forward studio experience. I called it a stage set for influencers who didn't know how to hold a knife. The final insult? They moved my fermentation fridge. The big one. The one I hauled up 2 flights of stairs back when this was just me and 3 interns elbowing each other for counter space. I found it unplugged, shoved next to the janitor's closet. Its culture's dying by the hour. I brought it up at the next leadership meeting. No one looked up from their tablets. The space is evolving, the COO said, without looking at me. We want to lean into aesthetics that speak joy. I blinked. It's a test kitchen. It's not supposed to be joyful. It's supposed to work. The VP of Culinary Aesthetics, who now dressed like a ceramic bowl, tossed his hair. Joy is functionality. The next week, a new internal deck circulated. Emotion-led menu strategy. Dishes that feel. Our best-selling items were renamed. What used to be charred umami root with black lime oil became melancholy crunch. The tofu-based ramen bowl? Rainy day hug. I stared at the menu mock-up and thought, we're dead. Behind closed doors, my team was unraveling. Sam, who'd led fermentation R&D since the early days, resigned. Nina, the saucier who could balance acid with her eyes closed, got reassigned to color and vibe harmonization. We used to have a rhythm. Now we had briefs. One afternoon, a call came in from a longtime client, an upscale chain in Tokyo we'd developed 3 core flavors for. They wanted to renew their licensing deal. I told them I'd loop in our product team. They'd already been rerouted. Marketing had intercepted the conversation and offered them nostalgia-forward concepts for the Gen Z palette. I almost drove to the airport that day. Instead, I went home and pulled out the contract. Clause 9b, reacquisition rights if terminated without documented cause. Still valid, still binding, still mine. I didn't smile. But I did start a new file on my desktop. Title, Aftertaste. The prep table was gone. I stood in the middle of the studio, staring at the vacant space where it used to sit, like a phantom limb. It was old, sure, warped in the middle, one leg always a little off-kilter, but it was the first table I'd ever built a prototype on. It had burn marks from test torches, knife scars from a dozen chefs, and Sharpie doodles from late-night breakthroughs. It was ours. Someone replaced it with a curved white island that looked like it had been airlifted from a wellness retreat. No drawers, no history, just clean surfaces and rounded corners, like failure itself had been declared off-brand. I asked where it went. Storage, someone from Ops mumbled, but we both knew that was a lie. The email came later. Hi, team. Reminder that all culinary equipment not in alignment with current aesthetics will be phased out for optics and cohesion. For optics. That week, they canceled our Flavor Lab series, replaced it with something called Ambiance Recalibration Thursdays. There was incense, mood boards, no tasting. One of the interns whispered to me in the hallway, "Didn't we used to cook on Thursdays?" I smiled, but I didn't answer. I just walked back to my office, shut the door, and opened the growing folder I kept hidden in my desk drawer. Printed emails, timeline notes, internal memos, photos even, before and after shots of the kitchen transformation. This wasn't sentimentality anymore. It was evidence. Then came Nate. He'd been with us from the food truck days. Brilliant, low drama, fiercely loyal. The kind of R&D lead who'd stay past midnight testing low-heat lactoferments for a client in Helsinki. He knocked quietly and stepped inside. "They offered me a position over at Kessler and Hay," he said, eyes down. I nodded. I already knew. Word gets around. Vice President of Development. Full autonomy, even my own team. "You should take it," I said. He hesitated. "You're not mad? Mad that someone wants to keep creating instead of posing for food-styled TikToks? Not even a little." He exhaled slowly. Then, "What are you going to do?" I smiled faintly. "I'm taking notes." He paused in the doorway. "For what?" "For the lawsuit I'm not filing," I said. "Yet." He looked back once before he left, something almost sad in his expression, like he knew the end was coming but couldn't stop it. None of us could. Later that day, the COO passed me in the hallway. He didn't even stop. "Still hanging around, huh?" he said with a smirk. I said nothing, just let him keep walking. But inside, I was already sharpening the knife. He'd started calling me the legacy mind in meetings, as in, "That's a bit of a legacy mind approach, don't you think?" Like I was some stubborn antique they hadn't figured out how to throw away yet. But here's the thing about legacy. It's what you leave behind when they think you're gone. And mine? It was still cooking. Quietly, legally, patiently. The quarterly review was supposed to be a numbers meeting. Sales performance, cost-to-scale ratios, R&D velocity metrics, dry stuff. I wore a black button-down and no makeup, expecting graphs and maybe one awkward coffee break. I even brought notes on 3 new core applications for the paste, but the room was already off when I walked in. The long table had been rearranged in a semicircle, with a massive screen at the front flashing a slide titled, "Evolving Our Culinary Identity, Gen Z Forward." My stomach dropped. The COO, Julian, stood at the head of the room, arms open like a magician about to unveil a trick no one asked for. "Today," he said, "we're excited to show you the future of flavor." I glanced toward the vice president of culinary aesthetics. He gave me a nod like I should be thrilled. I wasn't. Julian clicked the remote. The first slide, a menu mock-up. Only it wasn't a menu, it was a grid of emojis. Each dish had a corresponding mood. Quaff, bittersweet umami. Quaff, chaos crunch. Ah, zen blend. There was even a cartoon mascot, a wide-eyed mushroom in sneakers called Moody. For a second, I thought it was satire, until Julian spoke again. "This is the reimagined culinary experience," he said, practically vibrating. "We're not just feeding people. We're feeding their feelings," someone in the back clapped. A junior marketing lead. Of course, I raised my hand. "Is this serious?" Julian turned to me with a smooth smile. "Very." I laughed. It was involuntary, loud, sharp, the kind that cuts through a room. Heads turned. A few people blinked like I'd just committed a felony. "You're laughing?" Julian asked, voice tight. "Yeah," I said, sitting up straighter, "because this isn't food. It's a brand deck in edible form." "We're innovating," he shot back. "This is what the market wants?" "No," I said calmly. "This is what you want people to post. It has nothing to do with taste, technique, or food systems. You're trying to make dinner into a vibe." He turned, scanned the room, then dropped the bomb. "I think it's time we talk about alignment." Here it was. Some of us, he said, locking eyes with me, are still operating with a legacy mindset. But this company is no longer just about fermentation. It's about experience, lifestyle, digital shareability. And we need leadership that aligns with that. The room went silent. He didn't fire me, not yet. That would have been too clean, too easy. He just left the words hanging, cold and heavy. Afterward, no one looked me in the eye. I sat in my office alone for 20 minutes, watching the Slack channels light up with emojis and congratulations about the new direction. Then I picked up my phone. Micah answered on the first ring. "You ready?" he asked. "Yes," I said, opening the drawer and pulling out the contract again. Clause 9b, reacquisition rights upon termination without documented cause. I'd kept the check signed and dated just in case. "Let's begin prep," I said. Micah didn't ask why. He already knew. Let them keep talking about vibes. I was about to gut their little mood board from the inside out. They started with the quiet ones first. Tamika from the morning ferment line. Gone. No warning. Just a lockout and a cardboard box on her desk by lunch. Then Greg from flavor development, who'd worked side by side with me for 4 years, building the acid balance matrix we'd based half the core products on. They called it streamlining talent. They didn't say layoff. That word was too raw. The company Slack just posted, new phase. New focus. It felt like a funeral dressed in pastel fonts. When I asked Julian what was going on, he smiled like I was a child interrupting grown-up business. "We're evolving," he said. "Leaner, more aligned." Aligned with what? "Consumer emotion," he said. Like that was a real answer. By the end of the week, 7 of my people were gone. Every one of them loyal. Every one of them handpicked not for trend chasing, but for obsession with craft, replaced by fresh hires in brand design and culinary ambiance. Yes, that was a real title now. Culinary ambiance designer. I walked into what used to be our test kitchen and found a girl in wide-leg jeans rearranging microgreens in glass vials under soft glow LEDs. She smiled. "Are you here for the vibe audit?" I walked right back out. Marketing had absorbed the kitchen. The entire culinary team now reported to someone who'd once worked on frozen smoothie ads. R&D had been folded into menu aesthetics. And when I pushed back in a meeting, voicing concern that actual chefs weren't being consulted anymore, Julian called my tone emotionally misaligned. That's when I knew it wasn't just about flavor anymore. They wanted me gone. They were softening the edges first, cutting off my support, twisting the knife with words like realignment and brand harmony. The next step was obvious. They just hadn't made the move yet. Until they did, I stayed silent, collected. I kept my calendar open, but my folder of notes growing. Documented everything. Name changes, layoffs, menu shifts, financial rerouting. I copied press releases, before and after product language, internal memos from Slack. I labeled each one with a date, and I pulled out the check. The same one Micah and I wrote a year ago, signed and notarized, made out to the holding company for exactly $1. The price I'd sold it all for. Clause 9b said that if I was terminated without documented cause, I could buy it all back, for that single dollar. All I had to do was survive the firing. That night, I slipped the check into a plain white envelope, sealed it, and tucked it into the bottom drawer of my desk. I didn't send it yet, not yet, but I held it in my hand for a long time before letting it go. The next morning, I was in the studio when Ava, one of my old interns, now a junior R&D tech, found me by the walk-in. "Hey," she said softly, eyes darting. "You didn't hear it from me, but you're on the cut list for next month." I didn't flinch. "Thanks for telling me," I said. But I wasn't surprised. They thought I was cornered. They had no idea I was already holding the knife. The invite came from HR subject line. Quick sync, no action items. That was corporate code for something bad. And I'd seen enough wolves in pastel sweaters by then to know when a knife was coming. Still, I showed up. Same black blazer, same flat expression, no makeup. No one deserved my face that day. They met me in a room with soundproof walls and fruit-infused water. 2 people I barely recognized sat across the table, HR reps with warm voices and unreadable eyes. One had a tablet, the other had a smile so soft it felt like padding before the fall. "Thanks for coming," the first one said. "This won't take long." It didn't. They didn't fire me. Not exactly. They just handed me a printed statement with legalese about strategic restructuring, thanked me for my contributions, and informed me that as of today, my role as creative director was being sunset. That was the word they used. Sunset. Like I was a view. I didn't ask questions, didn't blink. I nodded once, signed the acknowledgement at the bottom, and placed the pen down neatly. The other woman gave a practiced nod of approval, like I was finally behaving. "We'll have someone walk you out," she added. And sure enough, 2 minutes later, security arrived. Casual, but present. The same guy who used to greet me with a smile and a coffee. Now, he didn't make eye contact. He scanned my badge, then took it from my hand. I was no longer a risk, just an expired ID in a system that no longer remembered my name. They walked me past the mural wall. I'd painted the first strokes of that thing myself, back when the building was a warehouse and we were broke and full of fire. Now it was covered in glossy acrylics and branded hashtags. Nobody looked up as I passed. Good. Let them believe it was over. I got in my car, pulled onto the freeway, and didn't cry. I didn't feel anything at all, just a bone-deep clarity, like the moment before a dish comes out of the oven and you know it's perfect. That night, I poured a glass of sake, pulled out the envelope from the drawer, and placed it on the counter. The check was still there, crisp, dated, signed. Clause 9B had never been revoked. No one had touched the holding agreement. They'd never even read the annex. I added a sticky note to the front. Delivered to Micah. Urgent. Execute immediately. The next morning, I dropped it in the mail myself. No courier, no drama. Just one woman in black walking into a quiet post office with a plain envelope that would crack a company wide open. Let them enjoy their emojis and mascots. I was reclaiming the thing they forgot I still owned. They'd walked me out like a relic, but I was a fuse. And now, I was lit. The first email came less than 48 hours after the check cleared. Subject, urgent, clause 9, B review required. Micah forwarded it with a single sentence. Told you they'd miss it. I sat in my kitchen, barefoot, coffee going cold, as the messages rolled in. Legal scrambled fast, but it didn't matter. Clause 9B had been sitting in that contract for 2 years, untouched, unamended, legally binding. They'd walked me out with smug smiles and empty hands, never realizing they were handing me the keys back. The brand, technically, was never fully merged. In their rush to scale, they'd skipped the final integration filings on the original holding company. I still owned controlling shares. The name, the recipes, the core process IP, it was all still mine. The empire they'd polished until it shined? Hollow. They had gutted the soul but forgot to kill the engine. And now I had the engine again. By Monday, 3 clients had already reached out. Big ones. A global airline that wanted to restore our in-flight menu. A Scandinavian hotel chain asking if I'd still honor our prior exclusivity deal. A regional grocer who quietly offered to pull the new mood meals if I could deliver the original paste. I told them all the same thing. Give me 2 weeks. The leak came next, not from me. I still had the check stub in my coat pocket. But someone, maybe someone still loyal, or just someone who hated Julian more than they feared HR, forwarded a screenshot to a food industry blog. Headline, Founder fired. Brand reclaimed. $1 buyback confirmed. That was all it took. By Wednesday, the story hit mainstream media, Business Insider, Bon Appetit, NPR. Culinary Twitter caught fire. She got her entire company back for $1. The clause was real. She warned them. CEO gets outmaneuvered by the legacy mind. They tried damage control, of course. The press releases were desperate and tone-deaf. They called it a contractual anomaly and assured stakeholders that nothing would disrupt the brand's continued evolution. But inside, panic set in because they didn't just lose the founder. They lost the founder and the name, the IP, the recipes. The $1 check was already framed in my kitchen. By the weekend, chefs started tagging me in their stories. Tucker, back to the core, was trending. Someone made a short film reenacting the hot plate fire from 9 years ago and ended it with a photo of me walking out of the building with my coat over my arm, eyes straight ahead. And the final blow? Investors started calling me directly, not asking for answers, apologizing. Some were even asking if I'd consider rebuilding. With them this time. The empire they stole wasn't just collapsing, it was burning from the inside out, and I wasn't mourning it. I was already lighting the next match. They thought they'd written me out, but all they did was skip the last page. The boardroom reeked of citrus sanitizer and panic. I wasn't there, of course. But I got the play by play from two different sources within an hour. Apparently, the emergency session opened with Julian pacing. No slides, no plan, just sweat beading under his collar and that faux confident lean against the glass wall. The same glass wall that now framed a company with no product, no IP, and no credibility. The brand was mine again, and their investors were pissed. One of them, a woman from Berlin with a dry wit and a deep checkbook, asked the question everyone was thinking. Did you seriously not read the contract? Julian stammered. Blamed outdated documentation, legacy holdovers, misalignment in legal oversight. Translation: he had no idea what Clause 9b even was until it detonated. The VP of Culinary Aesthetics, bless his lavender soul, tried to pivot, suggested a new campaign to reframe the disruption as an intentional rebrand arc. I heard he actually said the words, "We can emoji through this." He was escorted out before lunch. Clients had already begun pulling support publicly. The airline issued a statement about supply inconsistency. The Tokyo partnership posted a thank you and goodbye reel set to somber jazz. And the Scandinavian hotel group sent a very polite message that ended with, "We will continue our collaboration with the original founder, effective immediately." Meanwhile, I was 2 blocks down, literally. Micah found me a spot in a converted bakery, clean bones, brick walls, big windows. I signed the lease that morning. 1 year, renewable, no fanfare. I hung nothing on the walls. Instead, I set my laptop on a folding table and opened my inbox. It was full, emails from former staff, people who had been laid off, pushed out, sidelined, people I'd trained, laughed with, cried with. Some had already started sending resumes, some just sent a single line. "If you're building again, I'm in." I didn't reply to all of them yet, but I read every one. At 4:17 p.m., the first box arrived. No note, just a sealed envelope inside containing a USB drive labeled Flavor Vision Decks, internal only. Someone was leaking from inside. By sundown, the second package came. This one full of marketing campaign proofs, analytics dashboards, and one poorly redacted invoice for influencer partnerships that had bled 6 figures in 3 months. The old empire was hemorrhaging, quietly, elegantly, from the inside. And I wasn't even touching it. I was rebuilding. By the end of the week, we had 5 desks, a working fridge, and 2 induction burners. I found my old fermentation starter in a friend's freezer. We thawed it and fed it slowly, watching it bubble back to life like it had never left. A new war room, staffed by people who remembered how we started. Broke, caffeinated, driven. And this time, we weren't taking investors who needed mood decks. We were building it cleaner, smarter, sharper. The brand was mine again. But I wasn't just back. I was 2 blocks away with a knife in one hand and a map in the other. And this time, I knew exactly where every trap was. I wasn't supposed to be on the stage. I came to the conference as a guest, anonymous enough again that no one expected me to speak, visible enough that I could still feel the sideways glances, the "is that her?" whispers in the lobby. 9 years ago, I would have killed for that kind of attention. Now, it was just air. The keynote slot had been reserved for Julian, but by noon, the schedule board quietly changed. Speaker update, closing keynote, TBD. I didn't ask questions, just watched the crowd shift. Something was brewing. I could feel it the way you feel heat before a boil. An hour later, someone from the board pulled me aside backstage. "Would you consider it?" she asked. "Consider what?" "Giving the final keynote." I raised an eyebrow. "You're serious?" "They're gone," she said. I blinked. "All of them?" She nodded once. "COO, VP, half the executive team. They resigned this morning. Press will break it soon. Legal's still trying to stop the hemorrhaging." I didn't answer right away. Then I reached into my bag and pulled out a slim black frame wrapped in cloth. I already brought my closer. The auditorium was packed. Chefs, investors, students, influencers. Half of them holding phones, all of them waiting for the carnage they'd read about to become real. I stepped up to the podium. No slides, no deck. Just me and a single piece of paper folded in my coat pocket. "Hi," I said into the mic. "My name's Mara. I founded Core Paste 9 years ago, in a burned-out kitchen the size of a walk-in closet." They laughed softly. Good, let them laugh first. It made the silence hit harder. I sold it for $1. People thought I was naive. They didn't read the clause. A few heads nodded. They knew the story. It had gone viral by then. Op-eds and memes and legal blogs quoting Clause 9b like scripture. I kept going. I watched the thing I built get twisted into a cartoon of itself. The kitchen turned into a photo booth, the menu renamed for clicks. My people fired, my purpose erased. A hush settled over the room, the kind that buzzes. They walked me out like a liability, I said. But I didn't walk away. I paused, reached into my bag, and unwrapped the frame. Inside it was the check, $1. Dated, signed, clean. I held it up for the room to see. I got it back, every inch of it, for this. The room broke. Applause like thunder, a standing wave. I saw chefs crying, executives frozen. And in the front row, 3 of my former interns holding up their phones, not for content, but for proof. I wasn't a footnote, I was the whole damn chapter. As I stepped down from the stage, Micah met me in the wings. He didn't say anything, just handed me his phone. A text from legal. They're all gone. You outlasted them. I exhaled through my nose, the way I used to when pulling a soufflé from a risky oven. Perfect rise, no cracks, just heat, structure, and time. That was the final course. And this was the encore.